Hello, one and all, and welcome back to another thrilling episode of Off the Dome. I'm your humble interviewer, Jordan Brown. With me for the very first time is Shane Brockway. Say hi, Shane Brockway.
Hello.
Shane, thank you so much for joining me. I'm going to tell you right now, I can hear that there is a bit of a delay happening, so I'm going to try not to talk over you. The nice thing is when this gets all wrapped up, by Riverside, there won't be a delay anymore, which is going to be
Perfect.
weird to the audience because I'm going to like nod and laugh at something that you say, and then it's going to look like I don't know how to talk to people. But that's why. Shane, thank you so much for joining me. I know you are sort of like the man, the myth, the legend responsible for miniatures on Dimension 20. I believe your title is lead miniatures painter. How long have you been with Dimension 20? How long have you been making these incredible minis for them?
Luckily, I can easily say since the very beginning, I've been here since the first season, since the start, and haven't really left.
Yeah, I know you are responsible for a lot of people's favorites, and I wanted to get like a general idea of how things have changed since Corn Cuties for you in terms of, I mean, obviously scale and scope of course has expanded, but what are sort of the big differences that you've seen being here that whole time?
For our side of things, obviously, the bigger we get, the more structure we get, the more specific things need to be. A lot of the earlier seasons, there was a lot of wiggle room and playing as we're seeing, what styles look good on screen, what style of things does Brendan like or the new DMs. As everyone was kind of honing in their kind of creative vision. So some of those earlier seasons, there was a lot of like playing around, I think the perfect example for this is Calroy. Like that cake miniature was one of the first four that I made as just tests to see how we would do food people. There was no plan for it, but especially back during those experiment seasons, we would leave a bunch of extra minis for like Brendan to just do with what he wants. And that obviously exploded more than I think any miniature I've done. Um, but as we kind of go more like modern, and as we're doing shorter seasons and these a lot of little side specific stuff, um, there's a lot more like I would say set vision for very specific characters needed, right? Like even then there was creative vision, but we had a lot of just like we'll throw a couple extra minis because we have time for it. Use it if you want, don't if you don't. But now that things are like so perfectly rolling, it's like we are building specific miniatures for specific reasons. And sometimes after the fact, we'll like add a miniature for shots and pickups, but there's not a lot of that like level of wiggle room anymore, just because things have gotten so much tighter. Just narratively and everyone's play styles and creative styles are sort of in sync.
Yeah, I mean it's understandable as sort of like that scope expands, that you would sort of narrow into like the sort of really specific visions. I mean, you did mention Calroy, so of course, I mean, I have to ask, when you built a Calroy mini, were you like, I just made $11,000 worth of mini, or how big of a surprise was that auction to you?
Definitely very stunning. It's such a weird you make a silly little cake guy, and my only intentions with that mini, like I said, it wasn't for any character. It was just here's pieces that we bought. Let's see what works, what doesn't. In my own personal minis work, I love painting striped pants, and my only goal was to get a character with striped pants. I think that's cute and silly, and I like little silly guys. So I made a little silly guy, and I think that was my first experience understanding what pure fandom can do to such potent, silly little guys, if you will. So I was not expecting that at all. Still a little stunned about it, but I'm just happy that people like those kind of characters.
Yeah, I mean, people obviously fell it. I mean, there is a collective now that has a second Calvary. You got to paint a second pair of striped pants, which I think is really cool, and I think speaks a lot to one of the things that people love about Dimension 20 and Dropout in general, of like that there is a like deep love of the fans, that I feel like I talked to Rick about this, about, like putting up those minis for auction. Originally, he was like, "Does this feel like a cash grab?" Like, but we have all these like really cool things that we've made. Would people even want them? And obviously, people want them. I'm curious. Like, I mean, I'm sure you were following along as that auction was unfolding, and you said like obviously you were surprised. I think everyone was, but what I mean, that has to feel really good. How did that? I mean, to know like, hey, this is a lot of the work that I have put into this incredible career. Like, how did that feel to see like such a rewarding validation, I suppose, of your work?
It's an interesting like double-edged sword because on one hand it's exactly that. It's really satisfying to see people that into the physical objects because obviously this, three-fourths of the show is the improv and the character and the comedy and the heart that comes from that. But my side is all the physical side. And so while we in studio get a lot out of just even building it and seeing that come to life, from the players and the DM's perspective, there's a little of that disconnect of seeing, because obviously the content is the actual gameplay. So this was definitely a big slap of people love the physical work that we're doing as well, and that's really stands out. The other side of it is the like mind-blowing side of, so I've been doing miniatures for much longer than I've been doing even miniatures in film. And I consider this sort of hobby, like trash wizardry. Like I'll save trash and build things from that, and like cutting corners as much as possible. So every like my entire miniature history is turning the cheapest of things into nice minis. So seeing people like seeing these invented price tags for something that I'm like, I'm used to making trash into something, right? Like even these are like we were using weird pieces and just putting it together. That level of monetary disconnect is just kind of blew my mind. Just because it's not how I think about these things at all, right? But since it's something that I make normally, right? It's negative dollars for me. It's not something that uh ever has like price tags like that.
Yeah, it's really cool. I think I think and I think I'm glad it showed that validation to you, because I know it's one of the things that fans love about the show is that those miniatures and those battle sets, because they do feel so engrossing and narratively satisfying to be able to see those things laid out. Yeah, it's amazing. Your work is amazing. Um, um, yeah, I know I originally reached out to you to talk about this season of Bros End, but of course, because I've got you here and I haven't got to hear you tell these stories before. What are some of the other like minis that you've really loved working on prior to Burrow's End? That like really, are there any that really stand out to you?
Um, that's tough because as a creator, my absolute favorite thing is variety. I've got that classic artist ADD where it just strives to do different things and it can't comprehend just doing the same thing. So the variety we get out of the seasons is my big draw. Um, but if I had to narrow it down, the two seasons that really like pop for me as far as miniature wise is of course Crown of Candy, and the figures I made for the mice and murder. Just because, even though that is a smaller season, more contained season, because it was done during and sort of before, after it during COVID times, it was just me and Rick. There was a lot more time than we normally get because we have to be contained. You're working by yourself, and I'm a big fan of animals and little critters, and the from the Waterships down to the Mr. Toad and stuff. So being able to do very intricate patterns on clothes and different textures on the animals, we typically don't have the time to do that. So even though those are simple to the eye, they're just little animals in outfits. There's a lot more in those models than we've been able to do for other seasons just because of the timing. Um, versus Crown of Candy, which is the opposite of that. It was at the time, and in my opinion, even still, it's like one of the biggest things we've done. It has the most work I've ever done for any season, just because of the sheer size of that season. And everything had to be invented from scratch, basically. Um, I think that was the start of us starting to get some more custom digital sculpts in, but which we do a lot more now. So back then it was a lot of buying random weird shapes, chopping it up, seeing what we can make out of it, how we can make it foodified. So there's a lot more of that level of like trash play, which is what I prefer to do in that season specifically. So I think all of my favorite minis come from that because it's just none of that is something you can just get off the shelf. At the very least, it has like 2 to 5
Yeah.
different pieces of things in it, um, which was really rewarding because it's that one is very much a pure creation, unique, like nonsense form of season.
Yeah, I would love to hear more about how you do that level of like, I mean, like cake people and pizza people and all those things of like that mini is like you're not running down to the local hobby shop and like grabbing that one and just like doing a quick paint on it. It's like how are you building those things to look like? I mean, what can you talk me through any of them really, but like the
Yeah,
process that you go through for that?
yeah, I think the simplest way to think about this, because in the like the mini hobby side of things, it's pretty much straight kit bashing with a lot of custom sculpting added on. But um, for those not familiar with that term, just think of yourself like Frankenstein, right? You're not looking at miniatures as full people. You're like, that's a really nice hand. I could cut that off and use it. Or that's a really cool head. I don't think that model's going to need it anymore. So the whole process is Frankenstein, right? We're buying miniatures that have pieces or shapes that we think could look good, and just chopping them up just all piecemeal. And depending on what we're going for, there might be a little plastic pizza piece. Again, thank God for the slime craze of whatever, because so many people have weird little random pieces for slime. So a lot of the food stuff we got, I think, was like cabochons for people who make slime stuff. So it might be like a flat back plastic food piece that I just sculpt more onto it to make it feel more 3D. Or there's some that it's like the creamed corn golem from way back season one. That is just full original sculpt. So there's a lot of those ranges of how much is it fully sculpted from hand. Usually those things have to be quicker. How much do we have time to do a custom digital sculpt? Um, like back in the early days, even for the PCs, there's always some level of custom sculpting I have to do on it after the fact. Like early seasons, we're having to chop up arms and reposing. And now Hero Forge lets you do that. So a lot of that work is done, but there might be well, the player wants a specific thing in their hair or a specific hairstyle that doesn't exist. And so there's always levels of like it's a sliding scale of how much custom work we're doing, which is also makes it more entertaining for me because it really just depends on the design we're trying to do.
Yeah, what that's it's super cool. Is that sort of the same process then for like mice and murder of just like you're basically chopping off animal heads to get onto like humanoid bodies, or are there already like humanoid animal minis out there that you're able to like dress appropriately?
Yeah, so this is the fun tiptoeing of it since it's a show is that where normally, in your personal hobby, you can just go and do this with anything. For this, it's also like, well, we have to make sure that we talk with the creators if we can get clearance for it. So there's an extra level of like care of, oh, we found this mini that could be really good, but we can't use this for the show. Like one of the biggest miniature companies, Games Workshop, we don't use their minis for our show because that is very strict and rigid IP, and that's a lot of hoops that we don't like to go through, which makes it almost more fun because you have to really dig for these random and weird and unique stuff. Um, like for Mice and Murder, that one was a mix of there are of course a lot of animal miniatures and a lot of anthropomorphic animal miniatures. But the style ranges wildly. So for that season, I'm sorry, was a lot of finding just like I'd say probably like almost Call of Cthulhu-y, like I'm a guy in a suit, then you cut his head off and put another animal's head on top. So that one was a lot more of those. There's a couple of some of the nicer anthropomorphic animal miniatures are like a larger scale. So that's another thing to keep in mind is that some things that work really well just don't fit the scale of the season. That comes into effect a lot on the current season because of we're really playing with scale here. Like finding chipmunk miniatures were next to like impossible. So a lot of those are just squirrels with new tail sculpted on and ears changed because you don't always get exactly what you're looking for, especially when what you're looking for isn't just I need an orc with an axe or I need a space marine.
Yeah. Oh man, now I want to dive into Bro's End, but before we leave, just general stuff. The corn golem. You said it was hand sculpted. What is the material? What are you how are you building up that kind of sculpting?
So that was actually one of the first things I ever did for the show was sculpt that corn golem. Um, and so there's a lot of like honing in what to do with this, seeing how the show actually likes things, what miniatures work. And so that one was a mix of clay, a mix of two-part modeling epoxy. Um, the difference being that two-part modeling epoxy cures because of mixture, so there's no baking involved. So for that specifically, I did a lot of big bulk forms in clays or air dry clays to get like a nice rough shape. And then I made an uncountable amount of tiny corn kernels that I sculpted in epoxy, so that way they would be nice little hard. And then you're placing them all over. Um, so it's a lot of that, like weird roughing it up and seeing how much will translate. You know, you want it, especially back then when we were doing like, it's in the cafeteria, there was such a strict, noticeable grid. It's like you want the miniature to function in a gridded combat system while still feeling like an oozy, gross, like mashed potato-y thing. Um, there was a lot of that level of completely wild, like line bending levels of finagling. There's actually a lot of different versions of how did we want the arms to be, whether they were just flat on the body, whether we had big fists. Like we ended up with kind of a mix to have some more play. But um, that's definitely one thing we do a lot with the miniatures is being able to like build it once, recognize that we want changes, and this is where the traditional sculpting comes in, is that it's a lot cheaper to put something up, fix a new arm than it is to re-digital sculpt it, reprint it, re-texturize it, paint it, that sort of stuff.
That's super cool. I assume when you were building that corn golem, at no point were you well, maybe you did think this that maybe a character will dive headlong into one of the orifices that I have like provided as a stylistic choice.
Well, I have played a lot of goblins in my day, so I'm not going to say that the idea didn't cross my mind. Especially when when uh, when you're paid to make a big cream corn monster, and the biggest note you get is I need to have multiple buttholes. That's not a casual request, you know. I can say it's not it's not the last time that request has happened for me working for the show, strangely enough, but it's too specific not to be potentially entered and dealt with in some adventurous sort of way.
Amazing. Yeah, I you are I believe if I'm correct, you are the reason a six butthole model existed for Coffin Run. Correct? That like you got the phone call of like we need six buttholes on this mini. What can you talk me through what a call like that from Rick is like?
So the fun thing about those buttholes is it was like I have everything painted, the box is ready to go. Like just say we're good to ship it and I'll ship it. And it was the like, well, it'd be kind of cool. There's a lot of the when there's a lot of time, okay, hey, we want to do this, do this. When there's no time, there's more of the, it'd be kind of funny if we could do X. Like, do you think maybe we could do that? And so it was one of those where it's like it's ready to go. Like I'm gonna go to the mail right now. But it's like, well, if you want another handful of buttholes on like the tiniest miniature, I can whip that up real quick. At this point, you've had me sculpt enough buttholes for your show. I think I'm one of the few professional miniature butthole sculptors. So it was a quick word from there.
A proud title, I'm sure. Oh, that's so good. I did. I did also one of my favorite things that you do is on actually your social media channels. That you give us the close-ups of the minis that we often don't get in the seasons themselves, of just like really detailed like hey here is and of course the one that comes to mind is because we didn't see him in the season, which is Flaky Smothers. Like that like detailed close-up, like here is a biscuits and gravy man. I really love that sort of behind the scenes look. That I mean, the reason why I reached out to a lot of the D20 folks is because I love the behind the scenes that they do. What I guess I don't even know what the question is here. Can you just talk me through like a Flaky Smothers type build, and like the like excitement of getting to share that even post season on social media channels?
Oh yeah, I mean both Crown of Candy universe seasons are the biggest, I think, factor in this, that specifically, because like I said, those have by far the most strange, customy, like I get my hands in those a lot because those are just not models that we have. And they're all absolutely something that I have never and will never be able to do again. So there's a lot of just wanting to show it off. Like some of my favorite miniatures I've ever made for the show were unaired stuff from Crown of Candy. Like a lot of the Meat Arena folks that I really loved, monsters we made, but the characters just didn't go there because it's live play, actual play, which is great. But also I'm like, oh, I was really excited to show these off. So part of it is a little selfish, and like I'm really proud of these strange creatures. I'd love people to see, but also I do think it helps solidify that level of this is an actual play, and that's a good thing. Like we have so many possibilities, but the players really do drive this. And as a fan of, RPGs and am in my own fandoms myself, I'm like, I would want to see what could have been, what could have happened, those levels of debrief you might have if you're playing a one shot and you're like, well, you guys didn't go to this room. I always like to know. Um, so there's that level, right? Um, Personally, I don't do a lot of writing down of things while I'm building, while I'm painting. So half of that is also these are pictures I'm taking for myself for my own notes. Because sometimes there is well, we need to have another one of these that just didn't arrive yet, or we didn't plan for, or there needs to be some changes, or maybe we want to make a very, very tiny version. What did you use? How did you do this? So there's also the practical sense of those photos that I really like to share because I also I mean, lately, just because of time, I haven't done as much, but I also really like doing like free tutorials to just show off the different steps because I'm not school trained in this. This is again the trash wizardry of it. So I like being able to show off these different steps to so like if you look at a cake or a cake miniature fully done, you're like, how do they do that? And then the second you see, oh, it's as simple as these couple of steps, it makes it really approachable. And definitely a huge part of my love of the miniature and kind of gaming community is that community sense. So I don't really believe in the paywall aspect of like, hey, I'm going to hide my knowledge, I'm going to covet my knowledge. It's like I learned from doing it and from watching good YouTube videos. So I'm like, any chance I get to just show off this thing that people like, hey, no, it's super doable. Like you just have to take those steps.
Yeah, I know. I talked to a couple of folks about like the Brennan cosplays at New York City Comic Con, where people had like the DM screens. It was an Eggford Academy and a Crown of Candy DM screen, and I think Rick was like, I zoomed in on them, and they clearly had like kit bashed the same kits we had used. So I mean, I don't know. Have people reached out to you to be like, look, I made my own. Meat Man for my game. Have you gotten to see any like minis that you have helped inspire?
Yeah, so I actually get a lot of people reaching out, whether to ask about, how do I get into miniature stuff like this, or just recommendations on techniques or tools. A lot just show me their fan art, essentially, right? It's 3D fan art of characters I've worked on, and that's honestly my favorite part about this show because community is such a huge part of what makes tabletop gaming different than things like video games or um, stuff like that, right? Because it is building and growing off of that. And so I find that really rewarding. I genuinely love sharing tips, tricks, and that kind of stuff. And no paywall needed because I've learned myself and from watching YouTube and from asking people, and I genuinely believe that this hobby can, no matter your skill level, can be really fun, rewarding um, if you just want to create stuff, right? And if the only thing holding you back is thinking you can't do it, that's just not true. You have to just start taking the steps and learning from there.
That's super cool. And yeah, like I said, one of the things that I really love about Dimension 20 production folks is they all seem to have that general attitude of like, hey, you could do this, and here's how I did it if you want to like try on your own. Um, all right. Jumping into Burrow's End, though. I know when I first reached out to you, you were like, hey, you're going to want to wait to talk to me until after a specific battle. So the Wolf of Theseus. where did you come in, or I guess Meat Wolf as it is now being called in the show itself? Where did you come in that process? Does Rick pass along a note to you of like, hey, we need a wolf that can be not wolf anymore? How did that process start?
Oh, so this one worked out a little bit biasedly perfectly for me because I am such a massive fan of The Thing, of John Carpenter's version of The Thing, and Rob Bottin, the artist behind everything you see in that, is, as far as I'm concerned, a practical effects god. So I'm already a fanboy of that, and Rick knows that. So the second they had this idea of it, I assume in his brain he's like, well, this is going to be the easiest cell to shame imaginable because not only is it, again, it's a direct homage to The Thing. It's also was quite challenging of a miniature, which I really like to sink my teeth into things I haven't tried before, which this season has a lot of. So with that one, there was the uh, immediately like sometimes there's a hey, we want this idea, we have the things for it, we just need you to do it. This was a lot of a this is the idea. Take a look at what's out there. Let's see how we think we can pull this off, which I like. And so for this one, because of the scale of the figures, unlike some of the crazier conversions like the Sugar Plum Fairy, where I can just start scrolling and looking for things that might fit, uh, we had to restrict it to purely digital miniatures because we needed to be able to find the perfect size for it. And it was going to be much easier to rescale things than it is to change all of the PCs and everything that we've done thus far. So there was a lot of deep diving on pulling as many different wolves as I could find, pulling strange alien pieces, just various things that might work. So I basically compiled a big list of just, hey, any of these things could work, just what, like narrowing it down creatively. And that's where I passed it back to Rick and he pulls from there. And so once we narrowed down like which pieces, what overall style, that was where the sort of experimenting came into play. Because even though the idea is very simple, right? There's a couple of pegs, there's a couple of magnets. You hide the magnets in peg holes, right? Um, this was particularly challenging because of the resin. The 3D printed resin is incredibly brittle, and even though it's at that scale, like they want, none of our pieces were hollow for this miniature. So while it's dense, it's not like it's going to break if I drop it from a reasonable distance. That does make drilling it incredibly difficult versus drilling just plastic you would get cast, or even metal is I find easier than this material. So there was a trying to get the magnets in was a lot more of a challenge than I was personally expecting. Um, but it was finding the right angles to hide these in. Then it's sculpting enough over top of it that you can't see them, but not so much that it will ruin the hold. Because again, none of the pieces were hollow, so they're heavy enough that we want them to be strong without making it super obvious that there's magnets there before the transition. Um, then there was having to chop the different alien pieces and sculpt in enough like almost filler so that way once it is magneted on, there's not all these big gaps. Because it'd be easy to just have it magnet to magnet, but it's a completely curved wolf with pieces all over that can go to many possible spots depending on what a Bria wanted. Um, so that was a lot of sort of trial and error. There's definitely probably two or three magnets in that wolf hidden deep, buried down because I could not get them out and they were put the wrong way. So there was a lot of experimenting, covering those up, like just put something over it and we'll fix it. Um, and that was a lot of the like the mechanical trial and error. The painting was a breeze because that level of horror fantasy is something I do a lot in my own personal work. And so again, it was just, hey, an excuse to do a thing miniature, let's do it. So it was a lot of playing less with, intricate, crazy paint jobs, and more of just enough contrast in the different gore that it'll look exciting on the table and in the lighting.
Well, on that part, you certainly succeeded because it was incredibly exciting on the table, and I think, I mean, really impressively. I understand that they're shooting for they're shooting the miniature shoots afterwards, but like in the close-ups, at no point did I ever think like, oh, the head probably comes off. Like there was and I don't think anyone at the table probably saw that either. Like seams recovered very, very well. And I think also, like I love that you had the thought of like, okay, well, when the head comes off, there needs to be like the gory bits of inside before, like even before I put that magnet on, of like the new monster, the the full like the thing head. um yeah, I really love. I mean that it was an incredibly and also very unique combat in that like this like monstrous wolf. Um, I'm curious. I know there were a lot of pieces that ended up not getting used as Abria added them in the adventuring party afterwards. Are you upset that Brennan was too nice to the wolf and you didn't get to see like full like tentacles, spikes, all of the things come out of it?
Well, I think that's a natural side effect of this show is that anytime we do something too crazy, the players are just too smart. Like, again, the Crown of Candy, the biggest thing we don't see is these crazy meat monsters because they're too smart to go there. I While it is unfortunate to not see it in the proper lighting in as horrible of a monstrosity, I also personally would have been nice to the wolf too because maybe it's just a sick little guy and he needs help. So I don't give him any qualm for that. I've got enough pictures of my own to be like, yes, this wolf looks awesome. So I think that's a solid win-win all around.
Yeah, I mean, it was an incredible mini. The moment I saw it, I was like, "This is why Shane wanted me to." Like when it came out, I was like, "It's a normal wolf," and then I was like, "Oh, it's not." Yeah, I really love that. Jumping back a little bit, the chipmunks. I know you mentioned that you had to sort of like break basically squirrels and other tails and things. What was the process of that? Like, I mean, to get sort of like that scale of stoat, chipmunk, inside a bear, all those kinds of things. How do you go about even comprehending that? I suppose.
So the scale weirdly enough was harder for this season than any possible season, just because we unlike some of the other strange ones, right? In a world of food, anything is anything, so it doesn't matter. Scale is make believe. Even though we want to, with its own rigid rules, it's like who says how tall cake is? Um, Again, mice and murder, it's like they they're all in a set scale. We can use regular human people and just adjust the animals as we see fit. With this, because we're like these animals need to interact in a world that's bigger than them and need to be almost in more of a natural scale. The wolf should be the size of a wolf. The squirrel, the chipmunks should be the size of chipmunks. It made searching for miniatures way tougher on this one than any other season. Um, again, because we were trying to look for a lot of 3D digital sculpts, just because at that point we can put something on the table. And this happens a lot where it's like we'll buy, maybe five of things that could work for a specific character or creature, especially the creatures, and just Rick will take it to his desk and just look at them and see really hone in the scale from there. Which in seasons past we can just go to Reaper Miniatures, buy 10 different things that'll vaguely fit, and even before I chop anything up, he's just what will work for the scale we want. Because again, camera angles are a big thing, as well as just in universe scale. For this, we can't do that. Just it had to be so specific. So it was like going to the deepest, darkest corners of random thingiverse places to find. There's got to be someone who made a chipmunk, like just anybody. And there's not that much. Squirrels get a lot of popularity. A lot of mice because again, the mouse guards. Being already such a big game, we don't want everything to just be a mouse, right? So there's this weird level of like miniature hunting for this that we didn't have to do. Maybe there's something to be said for having to actually hunt these critters like in real life, but it was definitely a strange little hurdle we had to do for this one.
That's super interesting. Yeah, I imagine that. Yeah, I mean, I had not thought about that, but of course, it makes total sense that yeah, you would not have properly scaled things and having to figure out like, all right, proper scale to that. The chipmunks also though were deeply upsetting in their own right. Were you what you said you like sort of like how did you get sort of that rot? Did you help build those? I assume you helped build the tongues or whatever you want to call them. What was that process like?
So that was another one of those things where it wasn't initially planned. But when Abria comes to does a studio tour, ideas can fly, and it being such an open, creative place, sometimes we don't look at a clock and we're like, "That's awesome, let's do it." So that was a very last minute addition. In that it was like, well, we have this idea for a thing, but you're on a time crunch. So for me, I'm like, well, I could do things with latex. I could try to, sculpt some stuff, but at a certain point, it's like, let's just go ham on a bunch of wire and try to see how much nastiness we can seed in with paint. Whether it be like little drips of resin or mixing in different glosses, getting slight textures. So some of those things, which are some, fun shapes, but it's a lot more of a speed kind of like, well, what would be effective quickly so we can get it out there. Especially since those were needed for gameplay. There's a lot more wiggle room when it's like, this is a great idea that we could use in close-ups. Then we got time for that. But um, this was definitely one of those of just like, well, I'm not sure how to do this, but I have to do this right now. Otherwise, it's not getting done. So just playing with the materials we have on the desk.
Yeah, that's again like super effective. Yeah, I am very like viscerally upsetting, as everything inside that bear was. I know you also helped a lot, or helped a significant amount of like crafting the DM screen this season of like building a lot of the pipe cleaner trees. Is that sort of a like at some point it's just like all hands on deck? Like we need. How does that like? How do you get pulled in to that kind of thing as well?
So with terrain, it really varies. Especially now that we've got like the show's popular, it's bigger. We've sold miniatures to get like a good big proper team. Before it was such a small like amount of us working that I had a lot more like jumping back and forth. But now we've got such a strong like terrain team that I don't really help unless I'm done or there's a speed thing. Like the final board for Ravening War, I helped do a lot of because that was a down to the wire, all hands on deck. The wire trees are the other version of this. Is sometimes when we're deciding things for miniature wise, this being a much harder to find miniature season, I'm on the clock without miniatures in the studio. So because we're just really trying to narrow things down, or this was 3D, so we have to wait for things to print instead of just shipping and arriving, which is usually way faster. But this was I'm here, I need to be helpful, right? Um, those pipe cleaners will haunt every nightmare I have for the rest of my life because they are incredibly simple and they are incredibly effective, but there is no fast way to do it. Every every fast way I could think of just made it look really bad. So sometimes it is just like the pure luck of having the time waiting for these prints to take my time on these trees. I think I spent like a week just making as many trees as I possibly could because it's not. I wish it was as simple as cutting and painting, but it's not, right? We wanted them to feel like trees, not like pipe cleaners. So there's like mixing the glue into the paint, and no brushes I could use worked for it. So it was a lot of just I'm like with my hands rubbing paint and glue on it and just picking it out like a tree and sticking it. Because even trying to batch paint it would squish them and the glue would dry them flat. So it was a lot of like very intricately, unexpectedly time consuming work. I think every season almost has something like that, where it is like it looks great, it's good for the whole set, but you don't think about, oh, that's a time sink. So it was a perfectly imperfectly timed time sink.
Well, I mean, it worked out beautifully. The DM screen is incredible, and the trees add a lot to it. So, I mean, thank you for torturing yourself for our pleasure. Um, I know obviously I'm not going to ask you about like what did you make for junior year, but what I mean, I feel like you. What is going into junior year? How did that feel to be like I've been here since, but we didn't even call it freshman year yet. I've been here that long. Of like it was just fantasy high then. I mean, what was that like? I know you talked about like sort of the scope of it all, but sort of how does it feel to have seen this like incredible 5 year story like play out?
It's definitely bizarre. Because again, we don't think we're going to be touching these things again. It was so excited to go back to Colorum that this is similar. Um, but I think, if anything, and I'm sure almost everyone on the art team, especially those that have been here since day one, took it as a challenge. Because while I'm very proud of our first seasons, that was we're figuring out what to do, we're honing things, we're honing times and budgets. And so while it's beautiful, a lot of it is a lot simpler than anything we do now. So it's definitely you know, who knows what I painted on that, but hypothetically, I probably put the effort to try to get really nice textures so clothes look like real clothes and try to make them look as good as possible, depending on what happens, who knows. Um, but stuff like that. So it's a lot of
Sure.
personal challenge because you want to both prove that you've grown with the
Yeah.
show and that the team has grown with the show and that the creative vision has grown, but also you want to reward the fans who are, I would say subtly very excited for something like this. Maybe some of them have wanted this for a very long time. So there's a little bit of an expectation to reach that some of these other seasons might not have.
I'm sure it is. Annoying is the right word. Of like every time a new season's coming up, everyone being like, "Is it junior year? Is it junior year?" But it's finally here, or almost here, I should say. Um, what is like I've asked everyone, what is your relationship with sort of the D20 fandom that sort of perfectly segues into it. How does it feel to have? I know we've talked a bit about it, but like, how does it feel to have people who care so deeply about the work that you do, not just because of the storytelling of the improvisers, but also specifically the work that you're putting out on the table?
It's incredibly rewarding, honestly. I mean, I've been playing D&D since I was 7, and we found a book at a thrift store. I've been making miniatures since I was 13, and been playing these games for a long time, and so I've always been part of this community. Um, Fresh out of high school, I was working for Geek and Sundry and made miniatures for Critical Role, but like this is all like such a step back thing. Like I'm not part of these teams. I see these things grow. But this is the first time where I'm like, okay, I'm part of a community that I love and games that I'm passionate about and being able to work on things I'm proud of. And that is, that's normal as far as like doing film stuff. But I've never been a part of something where the community is that into like the art team and every single person who makes it, that they're that, excited to see more things created, even just not just the final episode. They love the final episode. They love everyone who acts in it and performs in it. They love every aspect of the creation of it, all the designs from the illustrator to the concepts to everything. And that it feels rewarding, it just checks that you spend, for me, my entire life growing in this community to actually have some level of like, I want to say recognition, but like appreciation, because like I genuinely believe, you know, not like lauding these specific, people in the community. It's like the community is the point. And so the bigger it grows, the more appreciation grows within it, the better it is for everyone. And so seeing that is such a big part of it for me.
That's awesome. Well, if people want to come see your behind the scenes, see your tips, your tricks, where can they find you on the places that they can find you?
Well, primarily on Instagram, just because it's all visual stuff, right? And I post a lot more pictures and stuff. So you can find me in my personal account and work and behind the scenes at The Blind Man, but that's with a seven instead of a T. Or you can see some of my self-published RPG work, some of my own miniatures I cast and sell off at The Flagellant and the Fool.
Perfect. Thank you so
Yeah,
much
thank
for
you.
being here. Thank you so much for spending time with me. This was absolutely delightful. I can't wait for the end of this season and for more in junior year. This is incredible.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm just excited to